Hi, hello, welcome back to my place on the internet. I'm Amanda and I post poetry, writing, and lifestyle content. So today I'm going to be going over how to build a sustainable writing practice because I know this is one of the main reasons that keeps people from writing and writing continuously and habitually is that they are not developing a sustainable practice for themselves. So they get really into the idea of writing, write a lot of things for a little bit, and then completely burn out and stop writing for months, maybe even years. And then they get inspired again and start writing for a little bit, and then boom, they flatline again. This can be a really frustrating cycle to be in, and I know a lot of writers experience this at one point or another. And so I wanted to throw out some tips and tricks for how to avoid common pitfalls when it comes to trying to build a consistent writing routine. These are all my personal opinions and suggestions, so feel free to take any advice that resonates with you in this video and ignore anything that doesn't. Over the years, as I've moved from writing for fun into more serious poetry and the poetic life in general, I've found ways to make sure that even as my writing wanes and flows, as any hobby or creative endeavor does, that I always come back to poetry and it's a consistent part of my life. I feel confident speaking on this because I have a very regular writing habit. The very first thing I would say is to ground yourself in a healthy reason for writing. Really dig deep into that why and determine what is your motivation behind your writing practice and why you want to write more and write consistently. Having a very strong, grounded reason or why can remove a lot of pressure to produce something good. It might also be important to reflect and to be really honest with yourself and consider everything that might be limiting or stopping you from having the consistent writing routine that you want. This might actually be things like not having enough time, not having enough financial freedom, whatever life events might be getting in the way. Sometimes we can tell ourselves that a certain reason is why we're not writing, like maybe we tell ourselves we don't have enough time, but really we could be carving out that time in certain areas and we just don't want to because maybe we're afraid of writing something bad, or there's another reason that we're procrastinating the writing process. So it's really important to dig deep and figure out what are the real reasons preventing you from having the writing routine that you want to have. And then also, what does that writing routine look like? What type of sustainable practice would you like? In an ideal world, if you just woke up tomorrow and you had the writing practice of your dreams, what exactly would that look like in details? Number 2, this one is definitely optional, but it's worth experimenting with if you haven't tried it before, and it's to build a dedicated writing altar or writing space. I actually did this for the first time when I was reading this book. I'm still not done with it, but it is called Poetry as Spellcasting. There are instructions in the very beginning for how to create a writing altar. In the book, they call it a ritual for setting the space. For example, one of the steps is to find an object that reminds you of times when you feel a sense of power. You don't necessarily have to follow instructions from a book. You can create a writing altar using any objects and invoking whatever senses and feelings that you want. Or you can just use, a desk, a random corner of a room. I think this can be good because it kind of separates out where you're writing and where you're not writing in your house, apartment, wherever you live. For me, I created a little mini altar right next to one of my favorite chairs to write in. It can be fun sometimes to light up incense, set a little intention for your goal for the writing session. Again, totally not necessary, but it may be helpful for some people, so definitely try it out if you haven't done this yet, because it was a real game changer for me. I already had a dedicated, consistent writing practice, but when I added that altar, it kind of shifted something and allowed new creative energies to emerge. Set reasonable writing goals. A lot of times I will see writers set goals based on word count, page limit, X number of poems. And while that can be helpful sometimes, that can also add a lot of pressure and a feeling like if you don't live up to those standards and goals, that you are failing at your writing practice. So I think something that can be more helpful is to set a goal based on time, like write for 10 minutes, write for 30 minutes, whatever the time goal may be. I think that can be a lot more helpful because it takes off that pressure to write something like quote unquote good. I think this is important because when you get to that sense of failure with your practice, it can create a cycle where it's hard to start writing again because you don't want to run into that perceived failure. I highly recommend being very intentional about how you are setting up your goals. My next tip is to let yourself take breaks. This might seem counterintuitive to the goal of having a sustainable practice, but I think sustainable means that you can't always have high outputs. I think sometimes people get freaked out by the idea of stepping away from their practice, but it's important to remember that any creative form or hobby in general will have seasons of rest and seasons of intense productivity. And that's just how the natural lifespan of creativity works. There are ups and downs, ebbs and flows. Sometimes your practice will feel so natural and authentic and things will just pour out of you, and sometimes they won't be flowing out of you and it will feel like you're in a dry spell for a while. And that's totally normal and natural. Trying to force yourself to get writing out when you aren't in the right headspace, you're not in the right mood, it's a season of rest. That can make you fall out of love with the practice of writing and take you away from a long-term sustainable practice. Instead, try to really trust that that season of rest will be temporary. Let yourself take those breaks and trust that you will return rejuvenated, refreshed, and ready for creative outputs at some point. My next tip, this one's pretty big, and it's to join a writing group for accountability. This is one of the main areas that I've seen people struggle in when it comes to writing, is that they try to just write on their own and then they get distracted with social media or responding to an email or whatever. And so they end up just not writing and pushing it back farther and farther and farther. There are so many free local writing groups out there. I personally run a Shut Up and Write group in my city. Shut Up and Write is an international organization where you just get together with other writers and write for a set amount of time. There were a lot of in-person events, but there are also a lot of chapters that have virtual events that anyone can join from anywhere. And these can be really helpful because you are basically committing yourself for that 1 hour or 2 hours to sit down and write with a bunch of other writers around you. For me, I found that it helps me to really focus and get a lot more work done in one concentrated period. So whenever I go to my events, I always set an intention beforehand for things I want to work on or what exactly I want to do. And almost always I get those things done, because when I'm in person at a coffee shop with other writers around me, it's a lot harder to slack off, especially for me when I'm hosting the events. I can't just not go because I don't feel like it. So I would definitely recommend trying out either Shut Up and Write or any local writing group near you, or just finding a friend or an accountability partner. Even if you don't have writer friends, you can always grab a friend who wants to journal or get some type of work done on their computer, and they can come join you while you write. I found that that can be pretty helpful, as long as you're not chatting too much throughout the session. If you're going with a friend, just make sure you're choosing the right person or the right people who know when to chat and when to be quiet. Another tip that I found to help is to leave electronic devices in another room or powered off during your writing session, or at the very least on Do Not Disturb. Really get in that habit of whenever you enter your writing practice, shutting off your social media, shutting off your devices, and really limiting that until you finish your writing session. I think having a separation between those things is really, really important. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons that people can get distracted when they're writing, is because they see a text from someone or a notification of some kind, and then it takes them out of their practice and into their phone. And then it's hard to get back into their practice once you've been taken out of that flow. So avoiding that distraction altogether is really, really key. Another tip that I found, especially in the beginning stages of setting up a writing practice when you're first starting to get a little bit more serious into writing, is to try out multiple different writing habits, techniques, and routines. It's easy to have an idea of what you like and what you don't like and things like that. It's harder to know exactly what will work for you until you try out a bunch of things. For example, you can wake up early and try writing in the morning, or try writing in the evening after work. Try going to a coffee shop and writing, or try writing at home alone. Try out writing in multiple different places at different times. Just overall experiment with your writing routine and see what works, because you might be surprised when you try something that you didn't think you were gonna like as much, and then that's the thing that gets you to write more creatively or more frequently. So definitely stay open-minded and try out a lot of new things, especially in the beginning. My next tip is to participate in a challenge or have a structured yet still flexible framework to follow. For example, for poetry, the month of April is National Poetry Writing Month, and so we have a challenge called NaPoWriMo, where basically we write a poem every single day. A bunch of different blogs and websites will participate in this by posting a prompt every day, which people can use to write a poem. I personally use the main website, which is napowrimo.net, and I go through every day and I write that poem. Having that kind of challenge and structure can be really beneficial, because it will kind of force you to get into a habit of challenging yourself creatively and sitting down and writing. There are so many different writing challenges like this, and you can always go back and look at previous challenges, especially for NaPoWriMo. I've done that before. We're past the month of April, maybe something came up where I was traveling, and so I go back in May, June, July, August, however many months later, and I'll redo or do for the first time some of the prompts that I missed before. You can even make up your own challenge where for 10 days you will write stream of consciousness writing the first thing when you wake up in the morning. You can kind of customize it and build the challenge around your life. As long as you're not too strict and remove some of the pressure, I think it can be very healthy. Where it starts to be a problem is when you miss one day and get too hard on yourself for like failing the challenge. It's always important with these things to have a balance where you're not being too lenient and just completely ignoring the challenge, or every time you do a challenge you completely get distracted at day 3 and never touch it again, but also not being too strict to the point where you're gonna beat yourself up if you miss one day. So there's got to be a good balance of structure and stability, and making sure that you're doing things that you say that you're going to do and following through on those challenges that you commit to, while also giving yourself some grace, because nothing ever can go 100% perfectly and according to plan. I learned this one pretty recently actually when I was talking to another poet, and they basically told me that poetry is my actual work, not what I do for money. Because I had been referring to my actual work as my 9 to 5 and poetry as my like secondary work. And they basically reframed that and said like, no, poetry is your main work, not what you do for money. I think we all need to reframe our lives in that context of what gives us drive, meaning, and purpose. For a lot of writers, it can be very easy to not take your writing seriously, especially when you have another job that's paying your bills, or you have a lot of other things happening in your life, and you might be seeing writing as a side hobby. But I think there comes a point when you invest so much into writing that it becomes more than, you know, a hobby or just something you're passionate about. It becomes a identity and a main focal point of your life. Reframing it in that way can cause you to take writing more seriously, to call yourself a writer, which can be so hard for people to do in the beginning. Not an aspiring writer, but an actual writer. Because if you're thinking about it in a serious way, you're more likely to treat your practice seriously too, and stay dedicated and stay focused and keep coming back continuously and make that a sustainable habit. Really, it just comes down to betting on yourself and believing in yourself, which can be harder said than done, but just know that it is possible. And if you're watching this video, you are on the steps to doing that. That is all for this video. I'm sure I'm missing out on a lot of other wisdom and tips. So if you know any strategies to creating and maintaining a sustainable writing practice, please leave them in the comments below. Help a fellow writer out. I would love to know as well. I plan to make a lot more writing videos soon, hopefully. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you next time. Peace out. I am also going to have a poppy because I am very parched right now. Let me open up my outline because I already forgot like what I was going to talk about. Health and a healthy reason for why you write. My camera is literally about to die, which is crazy because it was on like 75% when I started filming this, and now it's on 4%. So let me stop yapping because I need to film my outro before this thing dies.